A popular argument against resurrection as a natural event is Jesus' post-death appearances. While it's not uncommon for dead people to appear in the land of the living, they're called ghosts, Jesus's are held to be different. In its catechism, the Catholic Church holds that the body that was seen outside the tomb on and after the first Easter Sunday was the same body that was laid to rest inside the tomb on the late afternoon of the first Good Friday. Shroud of Turin research negates that claim, but it still persists as fundamental and misleading teaching. There can be little doubt that Jesus appeared post-death to some of his followers. However, the gospel accounts on which we must rely are extremely varied, impossible to reconcile, and they raise more questions than answers. In Mark, the first gospel written, the early morning visitors found an empty tomb and were told by a mysterious, glowing young man that Jesus is going to Galilee. The word going connotes physical movement. As far as we know, spirits don't go anywhere. They just show up wherever they decide to be. Later, Mark tells us that Jesus was taken up to heaven. The words taken up implies something physical being lifted. The same wording, going, is used in Matthew, which is the second gospel written. In Luke, Jesus happens upon two disciples who are walking, but their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. Prevented from recognizing him? What's that all about? Recall from an earlier lecture, in visual sense perception, the human being does not see anything. What happens is electrical, chemical impulses in the brain that originate with reflected light are translated into images which appear in the person's mind stream in ways that no one understands. Luke's wording implies that some type of mind messing took place. The passage reads as if Jesus appeared to the two disciples in normal, recognizable form, but a higher power interfered with the disciples' sensory interpretation capacity in a way that made him unrecognizable. Remember, too, the last time we saw Jesus, he was stark naked, with nail holes in his wrists and feet, wounds from a crown of thorns, and flogging and pierced side. Presumably, he was clothed when meeting the walkers, even though they didn't recognize him. Where did the clothes come from? Later that evening, at supper, their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. Whatever it was that prevented them from recognizing him on the walk was removed at supper time. After that, he vanished from sight, clothes and all. It's difficult enough to imagine a human body suddenly disappearing from sight, but the clothing too? How does that work? Understanding doesn't get any easier in John's gospel. Here he appears to Mary Magdalene dressed as a gardener. The clothing issues arises again. Jesus orders her to go tell his brothers, disciples, that he's going to the Father. No trip to Galilee, no interaction with disciples who are out for a walk, no dinner with them, no being lifted up to heaven. None of these are mentioned. Later that evening, he suddenly appears in a room that is locked from the inside, greets 10 disciples. Judas was no more and disciple Thomas was absent, and shows them the wounds in his hands and side. What happened to going to the Father? Presumably he was bare-chested, but clothed from the waist down. Again, we find a clothing issue. The scene gets real ugly without that caveat. The disciples relate the experience to disciple Thomas, who says he must see and touch in order to believe. Later, we know not how much later, Jesus appeared to 7 disciples who were fishing on Lake Tiberias. After rendering a successful fishing tip, he invited them to join him for a fish and bread breakfast, which was already prepared. Now we not only have a wardrobe issue to contend with, but also cooking utensils and food questions as well. Where did they come from? I have a sister who once lived in a house that she and her husband and a friend after them, who's a friend of mine, all claimed the house was haunted. My sister swears that the male ghostly guest appeared to her one day in the basement laundry room. Or was she made to think a ghost was present? Was her brain-mind complex being messed with? Elijah and Moses appeared at Jesus' transfiguration and were overheard speaking with him. The synoptics reported. Their presence was so real that Peter offered to build a shelter for them. Suddenly, like the ghost in my sister's laundry room and Jesus' sudden disappearance in the gospel, they vanished from sight. Moses and Elijah were present at Jesus' transfiguration. When they spoke, did they create pressure disturbances in the ambient air, which Peter, James, and John were also present, deciphered using his human audio signal processing capacity and the companion brain-mind interpretive ability? Or were the 3 disciples' minds being messed with, making them think that the 2 dead prophets were present and speaking? In his autobiography, famous Hindu Yogananda, he died in 1952, tells how he was held by his deceased guru, Sri Yukastar, in embrace in a hotel room in India. Was someone messing with his mind? The guru said his body was made of cosmic atoms. I have no idea what a cosmic atom is, but apparently is different than a real world atom. As outrageous as all this may seem, we have more compelling evidence that mind messing actually occurs. In 1917, Jesus' mother Mary appeared to 3 young children, 2 girls and a boy, for 6 consecutive months in Fatima, Portugal. During the appearances, the 3 children could see Mary, but the boy was unable to hear her speak, but he wasn't hearing impaired. His hearing capacity was being messed with. As word of the appearances got out, large crowds gathered for the apparitions, but they could neither see nor hear Mary. Mind manipulation had to have been taking place. There's no other way to explain it. Then, on October 17th, Mary's last visit, she produced the validation sign that she had promised. An estimated crowd of about 70,000 people was in attendance, and including news reporters. Called the Miracle of the Sun, at noon, the sun appeared to spin, plummet toward the earth, and then return to its normal position in the sky. And here's the deal. It never happened. At noon on October 17th in Portugal, it would have been daylight along the U.S. eastern seaboard and in the geographic area bounded by a line drawn northerly, Miami or Ontario, then easterly through Moscow and Beijing, then south to New Delhi, westward to Cairo, and back to Fatima. Not one single person in the envelope, other than the Fatima crowd, reported seeing the sun gyrate in the sky, nor were there reports of adverse effects that would have occurred if the sun actually dipped toward the earth. The local gathered crowd was made to think the sun actually did a dance. Their minds were messed with. The Gospels report incidents where Jesus influenced people's minds while he was alive, proving the human mind is vulnerable to being messed with. In Luke 11:14, Jesus drove out a mute demon who caused his unwilling host to be mute as well. With the demon driven out, the mute host spoke. Mark 1:24-26 reports of a man who was burdened by an unclean spirit. Jesus conversed with the unclean spirit, who verbally acknowledged that it had met its match. Jesus then expelled it, but not before it contorted the host's body as a parting shot. In Mark 5:1-20, he conversed with a phantom mind demon who had a name, Legion. Legion existed in the mind of a deranged man. In a compassionate gesture, Jesus honored Legion's request to occupy, along with his companions, bodies of a nearby herd of swine rather than face outward annihilation. The occupied swine, numbered 2,000, promptly jumped into the sea and drowned. Now, whether these accounts of Jesus' communications with the thought forms in other people's minds are true is a moot point. The evangelists want us to know that Jesus had the capacity for mind-to-mind communication and that the human mind is susceptible to intervention. Mother Mary has that capacity. According to National Geographic, she has appeared in the land of the living over 2,000 times, the first back in 40 AD. The point? Yes, Jesus appeared to his followers after he died. Moses and Elijah made post-death appearances as well. So did Mother Mary, 2,000 times. Saints Joseph and John the Evangelist appeared alongside Mother Mary at Knock, Ireland in 1879. A ghost appeared in my sister's basement. They were all wearing clothes. It is wrong to claim the Easter Sunday body is the same as the Good Friday body. The claim detracts from what really happened in the tomb. The body radiated away. There was no bodily resurrection. Assigning realness to the post-death appearances makes a case for a bodily arising, which did not happen, and it is misleading to a gullible public to make that claim. Thanks for watching.